My name's Jody. I am a multidiscipline artist, mostly street art. Born in Bristol in 1973, which those two facts are quite significant because it puts me pretty much in the middle of 1985 when I was coming of age, 10, 11 years old, and I was sort of, my eyes and ears were very much open to this new craze, this new kind of underground movement, which I was sort of very, very interested in. And there were basically four elements of hip hop. One of them is graffiti, which I immediately took to because I've always been an artist. I wasn't really good at the other things, the other three, which I'm sure your dad will talk about. But yeah, so it was very much an analog kind of world. So no internet, no mobile phones. We only heard little pieces about it on the news or a magazine article, or there'd be a new piece that would go up. So we'd all jump on our BMXs. We all have BMXs. It was the thing of the time. And we ride down and see this new piece, usually by an artist called 3D, who was obviously later on from Massive Attack. I don't think it was part of Wild Bunch at the time, but he was one of the first artists that I saw up and around doing some really interesting stuff. We would hear about a new piece going up in Bristol. We'd all ride down on our bikes to see it. Some of us had cameras, some of us didn't. I actually took a sketchbook down one day. There was a piece by the Artful Dodger, he's become a bit of a legend now, but he did a piece for Weetabix, and it was on a hoarding down by about a mile from my house, and I rode down on my bike with a sketchbook to draw the letters because I didn't have a camera. So they were it was very much a sort of an analog world, and like I say, about 11, 12 years old, it was everything I wanted because it had all the underground, it was underground, it was kind of cool. If you had any kind of association with it, particularly at school, it kind of gave you a bit of sort of, a bit of credit, a bit of social credit, which was quite interesting. But from my point of view, I always struggled, and now, as you probably see in my work, I always come at the kind of the culture, but from an artistic point of view. I never really did letters. Other people did that well. I was always much more into portraits and the figurative kind of work. And there were artists like Futura 2000 and John 156, these kind of guys and 3D from Massive Attack, who had a slightly more artistic approach, and that was something that kind of gave me a bit more kind of energy around, or it gave me a bit of sort of confidence to do the stuff that I wanted to do, and I became kind of known for it. But I was also influenced by comic books and films and a lot of the music I was listening to at the time. I just caught the end of the post-punk movement. I was a bit unfortunate. I missed out on punk, the actual main punk sort of movement, and I always felt slightly shortchanged. I always felt I missed out on that, and I caught the end of the post-punk thing, but then hip-hop sort of came in and very much sort of took over.
Yeah, so what do you think about, do you think Bristol is a home for graffiti in the sense of the word? Like, would you say it's one of the founding places for street art?
It's one of those things. I mean, here I am now in my 50s, and when I look back, I wouldn't have known that Bristol would become such, a mecca of street art. I think there's a few factors involved. I think we are geographically far enough away from London and other cities. I mean, obviously the next city along, I mean, if you discount Bath, you've got, Cardiff, Wales, which is, literally another country. I think we've been quite lucky to be positioned where we are, and also I think, if you look at, the immigrant population that came in, the Caribbean and the Jamaican sort of influence into Bristol sort of in the 1960s, 1970s, and then that building of sound system culture, which led to bands like Massive Attack and Tricky and, later on. But that sound system culture, and I think also that we tend to sort of take a vibe or a subculture like hip hop and make it our own. We're very good at doing that kind of thing, and then we produce quite, and obviously, we have to mention Banksy. Those sort of people were around. We have this way in Bristol of, I mean, I'm biased because I'm from Bristol, but we have this way of creating these kind of our own, taking in a subculture like hip hop or reggae, and drum and bass, and all these different types of musical genres, and spitting out our own version. We have, it's quite unique. I don't know. There's been so many different sort of theories behind it. I think geographically is one thing. I think artistically we do tend to have our own kind of spin on certain, and then that becomes kind of quite authentic. There's a lot of authentic sort of people in Bristol, Massive Attack, and Where They Were, Wild Bunch, and Tricky, Portishead, these sort of characters that were in and around Bristol that I sort of grew up with.
Well, a bit of a different question. What do you think about the police and how they've responded to graffiti over the years, and do you have any thoughts on Operation Anderson?
Yeah, I mean, I was one of the only artists that didn't get arrested. I was one of the younger people when it sort of hit. I think it was 1989 when Operation Anderson sort of came into effect. I was, from a PR point of view, down at Barton Hill Youth Club, I think John was always very much behind me. I owe him so much because he gave me the confidence and the wall space and the paint to come down. But also from a PR point of view, I was doing portraits and sort of and characters and figures and figurative work. So whenever the cameras come down, they would point directly at my work because it was just people kind of they saw the art in it, and he, as opposed to the complicated tags and the interconnection of lines and tags and colours and outlines that wild style graffiti became. So I think I always kind of stood alone. I didn't really work illegally much. I did a bit, but I didn't fear the police. I feared my dad. I feared it was something. I know it sounds stupid, but that was the case. I always thought if I got caught, I'd be 6 feet under. I always had that sort of fear in me. I love my dad. But I think, times have changed. I mean, it was graffiti then. Let's be clear. Graffiti and street art are two kind of, almost separate, depending on who you speak to. They've got an overlap. But I think graffiti was, it was underground, it was illegal. The guys from Barton Hill Youth Club were painting on trains and buses or any surface. I was doing it a bit, but again, I never come really fully from the hip hop, which I struggled with because I had affiliations with all the different types. I mean, back in those days when we were growing up, you had people who were, the punks, the goths, you had the heavy metal guys, you had the hip hop guys, and I kind of went around and I had something, an interest of all of them really, mainly the music, but I had obviously with hip hop culture, and particularly with graffiti and the art, the actual putting paint on walls, that was really my kind of forte. But times have changed now. I think it's interesting because we paint in several parts of Bristol. There's an ongoing problem in Bristol where there is an ever-growing list of artists and a subtracting or a shrinking amount of wall space. We were just talking this morning about there's some spots where you'll go and paint on a Monday and then they'll go back and paint it on a Thursday and they'll go over the work that they've done. It's barely had time to time to dry, but a lot of work has a kind of a second life online because people take photos and obviously it goes up on social media and it has video and stuff like that, which it has that kind of second life online. But it would appear that the police, depending on who you speak to and depending on what they've got to do that day, they may come and arrest you, they may take your paint away, they may do cribber damage. I was painting late last year down in a spot down in just not far from the centre of Bristol, and it's a grey area. It's neither illegal or illegal. And two police officers, there was some trouble in the park, and they came past us, and I thought, all right, here we go. And they both walked by and went, nice one. And walked on by. So you don't know. You really, there doesn't seem to be a clear policy now. Back then there was. Back in the 80s, back in the sort of the 90s, it was just seen as criminal damage, and the police, they had a bit of a, shall we say, a bit of a knucklehead sort of approach to it, in my opinion. But again, I was always coming from the artistic point of view. So it's a very, very difficult one. I think if you were to stop anyone in the street in Bristol and say, what are the 3 top attractions to Bristol, they're almost certainly going to say, anyone who's from out of town will say that the street art is going to be one of them. It's going to be the architecture, the food, music, Brunel's Bridge, all that kind of stuff, balloons. But it would always be, they would say immediately, street art. Banksy, of course, who's quite a controversial character, and for various reasons. But again, it's a difficult one because it's actually now it's a form of it draws people to the city. It's one of those things that's very uniquely Bristol, and I think that it's part of Bristol's tourism. So again, Bristol City Council have probably got a difficult where there's criminal damage going on, but also there's the artistic side of things, which is it's a difficult sort of balance, really.